What's going on, everyone? Just showing I'm on my way out to the gym and the hardware store. And I wanted to make a video that was a doctor request. It was a Move Well doctor request. And he was saying, hey, I'm kind of like getting to a loss of words on how to explain what is functional movement to a patient, why is it important, so on and so forth. So I figured I would make a video dedicated to that. A Facebook Live dedicated to that topic, and I'll give you a couple of different options, a couple of different thought processes. I'm at a stoplight here, and I am a car guy. I don't know about you guys, but you can't really see this over my dash, but there's a really cool Audi RS5. Anyway, okay. All right, so how do you explain functional movement? Well, there's a couple different routes that you can take with this. I don't really explain functional movement a whole lot in the chiropractic setting in a bubble because I'm explaining other stuff with it, like the model of segment, posture, and movement. And I'm explaining how people get messed up. And I'm starting that process by talking about why can't you move well? Well, most people look at movement and they can feel movement. So like most people look at movement as that is their deficiency. That is the thing that is stopping them from enjoying life. They can't move in a certain way. They can't perform a certain function. So why can't they move well? I'm going to explain this, and this is hopefully going to bring some light or bring some ideas on how to talk to a patient about this. So like something I would say to a patient maybe on like a report of findings on a day 2 when I'm explaining their x-rays is I'm saying, okay, look, so you came in with low back pain and you are unable to bend over and touch your toes. You have difficulty lifting up objects. You can't pick up your kids. You can't do all these things. So there's always movements and activities that you are unable to do. And there are many variables involved as to why you are like that and how you got that way. So first off, why can't you move well? Well, typically we have to go back in time and talk about what happened to begin with. Usually you moved the wrong way, all right? You moved improperly. You used wrong body mechanics. You got from point A to point B successfully, but with the wrong combination of movements. So maybe you bent over and you twisted, and that's not the strongest position for the joints in your low back to be able to actually accomplish. So when you did that, you hurt yourself. A joint got injured. You sprained a joint in your low back. The bone misaligned, went into an improper position, lost proper movement, sprained the joint. The joint is now swollen. That is called a subluxation. That's what happened to the joint in your low back. So that's the first thing, is the segment had a problem. Then oftentimes what happened, and right now how you're presenting, where I found that your rib cage is shifted over to the left, and maybe over the years as you've hurt yourself, you've felt like you were shifted for a couple of days following that initial injury. That's because your posture now gets affected because your body wants to move into a position that avoids pain. That's called an antalgic posture. So again, segment misaligned from trauma, your posture was affected, which actually compounds the problem even further because now your posture is shifted, and to an extent it stays stuck like that, maybe not to the full extent immediately after the trauma, but your posture will have the propensity to be shifted over to the left indefinitely if you don't take the corrective rehabilitation strategies to get your posture in check. And that in and of itself will make you more susceptible to screwing up the segment. That's just 2 pieces. And then the third piece of this, because a segment is misaligned, sprained, irritated, because your posture is shifted, now how do you think that affects how you move? Now you move asymmetrically. You don't have a symmetrical frame to begin with. Muscles are firing in an asymmetrical pattern from left to right. And your movement is what got you into this to begin with because you weren't moving properly. So segment, posture, movement. Now a side note on the movement thing, all of us, for the most part, once knew how to move well. And we lost that ability. So we as adults usually need to relearn how to move well. So how do we lose that? Well, if you look at little kids on how they bend over to pick something up, they usually do a sumo squat or a straight deadlift, and they just use their hips. They have all this mobility in their hips. They stay fairly upright with their torsos. And that's just a go-to, inherently, innately known way for kids to move. And then what happens? How do they lose that ability? How do they lose that function? Usually it's because we then send them off to school, and what do they do now for several hours a day that they never did before? They sit. So they sit in this hip flexed posture. Okay, so now muscles and things and all of that start to adaptively shorten and get into a bad situation, and they lose proper movement because they lose mobility. They lose stability. They're not doing exercises and things that would maintain all of this to begin with. So now they become dysfunctional, and they grow up to be dysfunctional teenagers and dysfunctional adults. And that's the adult that stands before me today, which is you. Okay, so that's kind of a long explanation. That's not really how much detail I put into it when I'm explaining this to a patient. So, but the question, and by the way, good morning, Dr. Matthew Redman. So the question that was posed by Dr. James P., and I will tag him in this afterwards, is how do you explain functional movement? So, like, let's say I'm going into a gym and I'm talking to personal trainers. I would say, okay, hey guys and gals, here's what we're here doing today. We're talking about this thing called functional movement. What is functional movement? It's just moving the way that the body was intended to move, the way that supports body mechanics, the way that you use your body to its strongest capacities and abilities. And there are fundamental movement patterns. Really, you can break it down to like 7 of them. And there's cervical patterns, there's shoulder, there's flexing the whole body, there's extending the whole body, rotating the whole body, balancing on one leg, and squat. Those are the 7 different patterns. And those are the human movement patterns that all of us should be able to do competently. And if we can't, then that's where a lot of injury and dysfunction and health problems arise, is from the inability to move well. So the way that we address that here in our clinic, or the way that we look at this clinically, is we don't just look at movement in a bubble by itself, but we look at what other components play into that. And there's 3 things, and then it comes right back to what I started with: segment, posture, and movement. So we address all 3 of those. Now, traditionally, chiropractic techniques, no matter what technique it is, no matter how specific it is as far as a chiropractic technique, they're focused on the segmental component, or at least the joint component. And the problem is, when you're looking at whole body overall, that's one component. You also have to look at a postural component, and then you have to understand how that ties into movement. That's the unique approach in what we do in our chiropractic approach. Now I'm still speaking like I'm talking to trainers, is that we address all 3 of those things. We see a need for people to develop strength and power and fitness. That's where you as the trainer come in place, because we as the doctor make sure that there's no contraindications as to why this person can't go through a movement, and we get to the root cause of the problem, fixing the dysfunctions that lead them into improper movement to begin with. None of us have x-ray vision. That's why we take x-ray of the spine. We understand spinal biomechanics, and we are analyzing someone's spine, their posture, and we take them through a detailed movement assessment. We break down why they can't move well. We clear out injuries. Then once they get to that point, we want to get them building strength and power on top of that and reinforcing those healthy patterns. That's what's going to keep them healthy for a lifetime. And literally, like, side note, anyone else that says they can keep someone's spine stable and their body healthy without exercise is really full of it. It doesn't exist. It's like anti-human. You're supposed to move. You're supposed to go through and keep joint range of motion. You should move every joint every single day through a certain range. You should be activating muscles. You should have certain muscles that are prime movers and others that are strong stabilizers. And there's these patterns that have been established and figured out long ago by all types of different researchers and biomechanics experts and whatnot. And yet all of these different professions look at just a patient through one lens. You know, if you're a massage therapist, everyone has a muscle problem. We just gotta, loosen up muscles. That's gonna fix everything. Or maybe fascia, right? Fascia is a cool word nowadays to say. So that's like through the eyes of a massage therapist. A physical therapist, it's, oh, everything just needs to be moving all around, and we just do mobilize this and create some stability stuff here. That's going to fix everything. Unfortunately, that's also missing the spine biomechanics aspect, the alignment aspect of joints that chiropractors have advanced training in, or at least access to, or licensure to be able to do so in multiple states. Yes, side note, I know there's some physical therapists that do joint manips. That's what they actually call them, joint manips, manipulations. They're proud to call them manips, and it makes me a little bit like wanting to throw up in my mouth hearing that. But and then they do that without x-ray, which is like, ugh. It's just, I mean, we can get into a whole debate on the need for x-ray prior to putting a thrust into the spine. I'm a huge advocate of x-ray of the spine and understanding what you're looking at. So, makes an easy distinction between why chiropractors should have the ability and the right to adjust the spine and other professions that are not using imaging should not. Anyway, then, so that's like through the eyes of a physical therapist as far as what they think causes everyone's problems and how to fix them. Not to mention, especially when you look at chiropractic biophysics, looking at spine modeling, like in the physical therapy world, if you have no idea what someone's spinal health looks like, or spine shape of a curve, there's certain things that are just impossible on a daily basis to achieve until you address those things. Like someone that has a decreased lumbar curve, you can eyeball it on a postural exam and say they have a decreased pelvic tilt, and that's normally how it's taught in the physical therapy world. But to not understand measuring angles and understanding coupling patterns and ratios of pelvic tilt to lumbar curve and translation distances on the sagittal plane, and like just knowing how to put all this stuff together and make sure someone is biomechanically sound, that is a huge missing piece that when you deliver that to a patient, they get better results, patients get it, and it also makes you very unique in this whole chiropractic paradigm, or just like movement paradigm, movement space, okay? And then the third thing is like, and then most chiropractors, most traditional chiropractors think everything is a joint issue, everything's a nerve issue, right? If we can adjust the joint and get that joint moving, that's going to fix everything. And I practiced like that for many years. My first, 7, 8 in practice was just that. It was just, I'm going to adjust the joint. I'm going to, get pressure off of the nerve, which is the way that I learned it, which we know scientifically is not the case in all cases. It's not always nerve compression, okay? It's not compressive neuropathology every time. There's all kinds of other mechanisms as far as joint fixation and how that affects feedback mechanisms to the brain and whatnot. So it's not to say that adjusting the spine specifically is not important. I would say it's extremely important. However, it helps for different mechanisms than our founding fathers explained. Now, side note, I don't go into that detailed explanation with patients. With patients, we say, we're trying to get the joint moving to get irritation off of the nerve. Irritation, I think, is a pretty truthful global word. It could talk about compressive neuropathology. It could talk about altered proprioception. It could talk about a whole host of things. So anyway, where I was going with this is every profession has their lens in which they look at things. The nice thing about when you incorporate functional movement and you use the move well approach is that you are at least looking at it from multiple lenses. Segment, posture, movement. You're maintaining your chiropractic roots, but you're not ignoring this super vital component of movement, which is an entire science in and of itself. An entire degree in and of itself is just learning the movement stuff, which I know can be very intimidating for a lot of doctors, and that's why they never step into it, because they can go to these movement seminars and they can learn about technique and whatnot, and they have no idea how to put it all together. How do you relate it back to chiropractic? How do you put systems in your practice to be able to explain this to a patient? And that is really the whole void that we filled for our own practice, and then we were asked over and over again to share this stuff with other doctors, and that's what eventually grew and formed Movable University. It was just taking our own systems that we were doing here in our own clinic that we were like wanting to keep to ourselves, and then we said, okay, we will open the book, we will share this with other doctors. And now we have, I think, about 120 doctors worldwide that are part of this system, that are following this, that are either in the process of implementing or have implemented in their clinics. So anyway, hopefully that answers the question. Dr. James, I will tag you in this video. You can watch it. I know it was a very long explanation to a short thing, but what is functional movement? There's certain ways that the human body is supposed to move that will keep you strong and healthy for a lifetime. A lot of people do not move properly. We take you through an assessment to find out if you possess these 7 basic human movement patterns. And if you don't, we figure out why. Is it a problem with the segments, the joints in your body? Is it a problem with the posture, which is how they all fit together? And why can't you move well? Is it a joint issue, a muscular issue, or a tissue problem? Or is it a motor control brain problem? And you can explain what motor control is a little bit too, which motor control is just the ability for your brain to coordinate and stabilize movement to get from point A to point B using the proper biomechanical patterns that the body thrives in and survives in long term and doesn't break down. So, all right. Well, I hope that was a good topic to cover. I got to jump in here. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Please share this with other chiropractors that you think would benefit from the things that I covered, the messages in here. Maybe you know a chiropractor that is like super hardcore. No, we fix everything with segmental adjusting. That's it. And maybe they're arguing with you, and you're very much an advocate for movement. Maybe you're like, well, maybe we can show you what Dr. Todd has to say, who's a hardcore Gonstead chiropractor. That's me, segmental. However, I've also, I've gone outside that realm into the posture thing, chiropractic biophysics. That already made me like taboo with a lot of the Gonstead doctors. Then from there, I rocked the boat a little bit more to say, okay, well, CBP doesn't address all the answers either, and the postural component can be affected by movement. Yep, he said it. So then I went to really learn and study functional movement, but then realized there weren't systems put together with functional movement for chiropractors. It was very, confusing, and just like seriously felt like you had to go back to school for another 4 years just to conceptualize it all. So we distilled it down and put it together into protocols. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I think there's a lot of other chiropractors that are either on the fence with this stuff. They know that movement is important. They don't know what to do with it. Or maybe they don't know movement's important, but these types of messages that we talk about here might resonate with them and kind of like shake something internally for them to, when they're, at home and no one's looking and they want to be honest with themselves, they can say, you know what, I think he's right. And as much as I can, cover my eyes and plug my ears and pretend that it's all going to be okay and I'm going to fix everything under the sun, and I'm really doing my best for my patient by not addressing movement, maybe they can then admit to themselves there's a little bit more out there. It does fall under the realm of a chiropractor. We should be understanding this. If we're not doing it in office, at least we need to build relationships with other practitioners that can render the services, render the care to a patient. We cannot just continue to roll the dice, assume that our patient who we're addressing segmentally is going to just accidentally or magically stumble upon other practitioners that share the same passion and conviction, understand the importance of movement, how that fits into posture and segment, and that we're going to co-manage these patients with other practitioners and aren't going to badmouth us as a chiropractor, try to take the patient out of our realm. So now that patient feels like foam rolling is what fixed them and not specific adjusting, because symptomatically the foam rolling might give them some instant gratification, where the segmental and the postural component is really a lot of the long-term longevity for the patient. So hopefully that was helpful. This is a lot longer than I intended, but comment, share, check out moveWellUniversity.com so you can see some of the stuff we're doing there. There's a reviews tab you can look at. There's over 20 different doctors that share like little 1 to 2 minute clips on what they're doing with Move Well University in their practice. So check it out. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.